In the world of literature, there is no other book like the Bible. Welcome to the wonder of His Word.
Hi, thank you for joining us again. We're going to be looking at the next session, and this session deals with Genesis chapter 12. If you have been following us, you would notice that we're sticking to the book of Genesis as we consider the wonder of His Word. Now, in Genesis chapter 12, in the first 3 verses, it says the following. Now the Lord had said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Well, let's have a look at the story of Abraham. It's a fascinating story because everything in the Bible is fascinating. But this is like super fascinating. If you consider Abraham and his background, he grew up as a boy in what you and I would call modern-day Iraq. This area was an area known as the Ur of the Chaldeans, and it existed close to the river Euphrates. Now, what happened was Abraham had been brought up in a civilization where people did not believe in God. You understand that people had turned against God, they had turned to worshiping of nature and the creation instead of the Creator, and people then became governed by their own likes and dislikes and their own thoughts and their own imaginations, so they drifted further away from God. But God spoke to Abraham in a very, very clear way and revealed something intuitively to Abraham about the divine. Abraham believed not in the gods that were made with human hands or in the creation, but he believed in the Creator. He is considered to be the father of monotheism. Remember, we looked at that in our previous talks. What is monotheism? The belief in one God. Abraham is considered to be the father of this monotheistic faith. And the reason why he came to this realization is, besides him being a very thinking person, a very analytical person, and a deep thinking person at that, intuitively God revealed to him that he did not need to worship idols. Now, what makes it fascinating is that according to rabbinic history or rabbinic teaching, that is what the Jewish Hebrew people still teach to this day, that Terah, which was the father of Abraham, was an idolater. He was one who manufactured idols out of silver and gold and marble and wood, and he would sell it to the populace. And the story goes that Abraham was put on duty to look after the business of the shop that day in selling the idols to the community, which he had objected and said to his father, "I do not believe in these things." Father said, "Well, if you want bread on the table tonight, my boy, you're going to have to sell these idols to the population." And the story goes, according to rabbinic teaching, that an old lady came in to buy one of the gods and one of the idols. And Abraham said, "Well, you give me whatever the bartering system was, and I will give you the idol." But he looked at the woman and he said, "But I recognize you. Didn't you come in a couple of weeks ago and buy one of these gods?" And she said, "Yes, but unfortunately, they broke into my home." You see, even those days they would break into homes. They broke into my home and they stole that idol, and I've come to buy another one. And Abraham said, "Well, how can you serve a God that can't even protect itself from thieves? Did you know, I want to tell you about a God that is not made with human hands." And this woman was intrigued. And Abraham told her that he believed in the God that's not made with human hands, the true Creator. The woman wagged her head and said, "Wow, I've never heard that before." And she left without taking the God with her, the idol with her. And Abraham was so angry. He picked up a big sledgehammer and he smashed practically to pulp all of these different idols, except one big marble idol that he left standing in the workshop on display. And that was a marble idol with his hands like this. And he took the sledgehammer and he put it in the idol's hands. When his father Terah came in and saw the mayhem, he said, "Who has done this?" And Abraham didn't have to say anything. He just directed his father's gaze to that of the marble god. His father says, "You know that's impossible. Don't blame it on someone. Don't blame it on that idol, because that idol is dead." He said, "Oh, thank you, Father. You've now come to the realization of what I've been trying to tell you all along, that what we are doing is we are propagating a message that these gods are living gods. I serve the true living God, and these gods that you are selling to people are dead idol gods." Well, that is not a biblical story, but it is a narrative that is often told to young Jewish boys that are going to be celebrating their bar mitzvah, because when a Jewish boy turns 13, he becomes a son of the covenant. And the rabbis actually teach them this particular concept about the faith of Abraham. Now, besides that very interesting little story, the truth about Abraham was that he left the land of the Chaldeans because God had said, "I want you to leave your family, and I want you to take with you your wife, Sarah, and you can take your nephew, Lot, along with you." And off they went on their sojourn. God was going to lead them to the promised land. But Abraham, very much like Moses, they took some wrong turns and they landed in some places where they should not have landed up. But the interesting thing is that Abraham meets with God, and God gives him a new syllables. His name is Abram, which is Abram. Now God declares him as Abraham, adding another 2 letters, an H and an A and an H. So his name is Abraham. What's the significance of that? That AH are 2 letters that come from the Hebrew name for God, and that is Yahweh. Yahweh. And God takes his name, part of his own name, and he merges it with Abraham, and he says, "Abraham, you're now going to be my representative. You're going to be God's divine representative on earth. And from your seed, I am going to bless all the nations of the world. And those that curse you will be cursed, and those who bless you will be blessed." Well, the name Abraham means someone who is a father of many. The sad thing is that Abraham had a wife, Sarah, and she could not bear him a child. She could not fall pregnant. She couldn't conceive. And the result was that Sarah, his wife, suggests that a surrogate mother be offered to him. And that surrogate mother, would have been her servant by the name of Hagar. Now, Hagar was an Egyptian woman, and Sarah came from the people of Eber, E-B-E-R, from which we get the Hebrew word Hebrew, which means people from the other side of the river, but nevertheless. So what happens is that she conceives, that's Hagar, and she gives birth to a child, and they name him Ishmael, the first child of Abraham, Ishmael. And many years later, Sarah, who couldn't conceive, falls pregnant. And she gives birth to a child whose name is Isaac. And as the 2 boys start growing up, Sarah becomes a bit concerned because she sees Hagar, her servant, the Egyptian woman, and Hagar's son, Ishmael. She finds them laughing and mocking her son Isaac. So she speaks to Abraham and says, "Listen, my child is a child of promise, and that other child that you had is a child of your bondservant. It's a child of bondage. And my child of promise should not share the inheritance with a child of bondage." So Abraham is left with a terrible choice. He either listens to his wife, or he continues having these 2 boys growing up side by side. And what he does, he speaks to God about it, and God says, "No, your wife Sarah is right." Because remember, it wasn't God's instruction that he should take Hagar as his wife, but it was, once again, human intuition, or human ingenuity is a better word. What actually happens then is that these 2 boys are not going to grow up side by side. God says to Abraham, "Put out Hagar." And Hagar leaves, and God says, "Don't worry, I will look after her and the boy, and he does. From Ishmael comes all of the Arab nations. Many, many Muslims are not Arabs as such, but the Arab people come from the lineage of Ishmael. And then you have the lineage of Isaac, very interesting one. Isaac, the son born to Sarah, gets married to Rebekah, and they have two children, twin boys. The one is Esau, and the other one is Jacob. Now, the older of the twins is Esau, so he should receive the blessing that God had promised to Abraham. But we find that he becomes someone who disregards God's promises, disregards the promises that God has made to Abraham, and he begins to show once again a very rebellious, self-centered spirit. I will do it my way, not God's way. And we know that what he does, he sells his birthright. One day he comes in from the veld after hunting. He's absolutely exhausted, and his brother Jacob's in the kitchen, and he says, I need some of that pottage. And that pottage is in actual fact like a thick soup, a special ceremonial soup that would be made by the son to give to his father as a acknowledgement of honoring his father. And he says, please, give me something to eat. I will die if I don't have something to eat. And Jacob says, I will give it to you. I will give it to you if you give me your birthright. And because he doesn't regard his birthright as being significant, he gives it to his brother Jacob. So Jacob takes on the full identity of Esau, and Jacob eventually, ultimately wrestles with God. His name is changed from Jacob to Israel. He becomes the father of the Israelites. To this day, we have a lot of conflict in the Middle East. We have a lot of suspicion and distrust. There's a lot of fighting over the inheritance of the land. Well, you can trace it right back to this narrative in the book of Genesis, in that the children and the descendants of these two men, Ishmael and Isaac, are still fighting over the inheritance. But let's get back to Esau. Esau and Jacob. The Israelites came from Jacob, but who was the progenitor of the Edomites, a group called the Edomites? You may say, who are the Edomites? Well, if you read the New Testament, you know that King Herod, the tetrarch, he controlled 1/4, 1/4 of the Roman Empire in Palestine. And he was a puppet king, made king by the Roman authorities, largely due to the fact that Herod was an Edomite who could trace his lineage back to Abraham, but not through Jacob, but through Esau. So the children of Esau were the Edomites. King Herod, therefore, dominated the Jewish people, the Israelites, in Palestine. And when it was heralded that Jesus was going to be born the Son of God, we know that Herod was intimidated by this. That's where he said to the wise men, tell me, how long have you seen the star? I want you to kill all the Hebrew children. Why? Because he was threatened by the birth of the true, authentic King of Kings and Lord of Lords and the King of the Jews. And he knew that his throne and indeed his dynasty would have been affected. And so we can trace all of these different concepts of the Bible right back to this narrative about Abraham. But let's get back to Abraham. We know that the story goes that God had told Abraham that he should sacrifice his son Isaac on Mount Moriah. Awful request. Why should he even contemplate that? Well, God was trying to teach Abraham a big lesson, and that was to teach him to know and to believe and understand that he attached a premium to God's promise rather than to his own ambition. Let me explain. If he was enamored or overwhelmed by having the son who he loved and adored, namely Isaac, in order for him to demonstrate to himself his love for God, God would challenge him, sacrifice your child. Now, that would be foreign to us in these modern days. But remember, in those ancient times, people used to sacrifice their children to the gods. He had come from the land of the Chaldeans, where this was a common practice, where people would take their daughters and their sons and sacrifice to the gods to receive favor and blessing and grace from those gods. That's what they would do. So it was nothing foreign for Abraham to sacrifice his son. But what is strange is that Abraham takes his son with the servants and they travel up to the mountain. And before they climb the mountain, he leaves the servants behind. He only takes the son. And the boy is totally obedient to his father. Surely, Abraham is an older man. The boy could have run away. But Abraham says, son, believe me, I'm going to sacrifice you. Because the boy asks, where's the sacrifice? Where's the lamb? Where's the ram? Where is the animal that's supposed to be sacrificed, which is our custom? And he says, no, the Lord will provide. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. And Abraham takes his son, he puts him onto the sacrifice. And as he's about to make that sacrifice, he hears a word from God, do the boy no harm. And he hears a noise, and in the thicket, in the bush, there is a ram that is caught by its horns. And he takes that, and he sacrifices that on behalf of his son. Now, that's a weird story. But it doesn't become weird when you understand what the motive was. The motive there was to demonstrate to history and all those who would follow Abraham that Abraham had so much faith in God that if God miraculously could have given him a son through his wife Sarah, who was totally barren and very, very old, if God was able to do that, even if he obeyed God and slaughtered his son, God had the power to raise his son from the dead. That is the faith of Abraham. You can read about that in the book of Hebrews. That gives us the hallmark of people of faith. That's the faith that Abraham had. So this is a lesson to you and me that we shouldn't sacrifice our children. We shouldn't make these sacrifices that many people believe they need to make in order to get God's favor. Because God himself, just like Abraham, God himself sent his son and allowed his son to die on your behalf and my behalf. And through his sacrifice, we can have a relationship with God and live out the very faith of Abraham that trusted God in all things. So no matter what you're going through, no matter what the challenges may be, whatever you think is on your mind and troubling you, remember, do it God's way, not your own way. Because faith is submission, and submission is trust. When you trust in God, let me tell you, your life can take on a whole new dimension. God be with you, and thanks for joining us for this session.